Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth edition of Recruiter Diaries, where we talk to recruiting professionals and hiring managers who've done significant hiring in their career. Today, our guest is Vaisagh, who we call VT for short, who's the CTO at impress.ai and has done tons of tech recruiting in the company. Welcome to this edition of Recruiter Diaries, Vaisagh. We're really glad to have you here.
Hi, sir.
Great. So let's jump right in. So, VT, the first thing we want to know from you is your role at impress.ai, and then we want to know more about your recruiting experience.
At Impress, I lead the product and technology teams. I have a team of 50 that I've hired over the years. With Impress, for hiring this team, I've done probably about 80 hires that we've made, around 10 to 20 interviews for each of those hires, so a little over 1,000 interviews is what that would come to.
That's a lot of tech hiring experience. So today we want to learn about some of the things you've learned through that experience. Uh, did you ever consider that you have formal training in interviewing before you go on this journey of hiring people? So how did you get that formal training or any kind of training in interviewing before you started hiring people?
So there wasn't much formal training. Like when I was doing my research, I did get a chance to interview candidates with my fellow postdocs and professors, but I wouldn't say that was the same as actual interviewing candidates. That we learned in two ways: one, in building Impress itself and learning a lot of the best practices in hiring, reading up a lot and about that. So I generally care about doing the things that I do well. So I read up a lot on IO psychology and how we should do better interviews uh, as well. And there's a lot I've learned over the years. I think I was a much worse interviewer to start off 4 or 5 years back, and I'm a much better interviewer today, where I'm able to get to the information in a much more easy way and make the interviewee feel comfortable as well. So it's been on the job learning mostly.
So, what does the hiring process at Impress AI's tech and product team look like? Where do you start from? All the way from defining the role. Walk us through that process.
So we start off with the job description, obviously. So in the we figure out exactly where the candidate and the role fits within which team, what seniority, and what are they expected to execute on. We Now this has also evolved obviously over the years, and we have a lot more clarity on what are the different competencies that's required for each role and all that. So we start off with a job description along with a list of the competencies that we'll be looking for that role. The second thing that happens, especially being like a startup entrepreneur, is my different teams have different a different number of people. So now I have like 20 engineers right now. So I have a lot of support there to interview. But when I'm hiring for project managers, I just have like one project manager right now in the team. So accordingly, the process varies a bit. In the more structured part of the process, where there's actually a team already, we start off with the competencies. Then we discuss who all will be taking part in the hiring process. We decide the number of interviewers, and we first split what will be covered in each interview. Our ideal process is around 3 interviews if we have enough interviewers, where the first two focus on different aspects of competencies, soft skills, hard skills, etc. The third one, it's with a founder essentially, because we want to make sure that they have a culture fit. So in that third one, it's not so much about assessing if the candidate has the ability to do the role. It's just whether they fit culturally into the company. So 3 interviews is what we try to go towards. Depending on the role, we might, if it's possible to have a case study as well, and it's a more senior role where we can talk through that. Third interview ranges from either a 30-minute chit chat to 1.5 hour one, where we actually go through some case study. We brainstorm through it together, and we get a bit more of an idea how uh, each of us work.
Nice. What I want to know as the next question from there is, how do you prepare before you go into an interview with a candidate?
For me, it starts off first with the what I said. So we have the competencies to start off. I The way we do the process, and I know there are other ways in which it's done, is I actually also look at the other. So if I typically am the last interviewer in this process as a founder, so I look at the notes from the others and highlight to myself what are the aspects that we need to cover in this, what are the possible red flags or things that we need to explore further that comes in. So those are the things I note before an interview, especially for a role that I actually already know hiring for. So engineers, we've been hiring very like every month we've been hiring, so there's a lot of experience there. But as we grow, there are new roles that come up that we need to hire for. So then there is a bit more. learning I have to do. So I read up on that role, what's in that. And the other major part I try to look at is also, since I don't have that much experience working in the industry, I sort of look up what the industry experience for that is, and like what are the different stages in that. Because one of the questions that I'm asked as the hiring manager and founder is about their career prospects here and things like that. And I want to make sure that I can sync up with their experience of the outside world as well. So I I try to do that research as well, so that I have an idea how to answer those questions when they come up in that discussion. So once I have all of this, typically I have my questions, no, not questions, the points I want to cover noted down. During the interview, I don't go just through that. I have a script. We follow the questions, but I typically make it such that if it's a 1 hour, if it's a 1 hour interview, I around every 15 to 20 15-minute mark, I do a check-in on how I'm going on those questions. Because one of the things that happens in my interviews is the candidates have a lot to talk about in their experience. So I sort of need to figure out a way to get them to, okay, stop now, I want to talk about this. So I constantly look at that to make sure we are in that time zone. And uh,
Having worked with you for so many years, and as colleagues over the past 8 9 years now, I am a big fan of the amount of information you're able to distill into your notes. My notes, for example, as your co-founder, of course, are very factual, and your notes are full of insights. Is there a science to how you take your notes when you're going through an interview or after an interview when you're digesting the information? What do you try to cover there?
So one of the things I don't typically take notes during the interview itself. Now, one of the awkward ticks I have as an interviewer is sometimes when the person's talking about a lot of experience, I know that I close my eyes and listen. That's just that's something that interviewees have told me about later once they've joined. That helps me listen more carefully. So I'm during the interview, I'm just listening, and I'm actually synthesize those insights. I'm trying to synthesize it during the interview itself, and each of my questions are actually driven by that as well. So in the beginning itself, based on the notes and all of that, there is a certain hypothesis of the candidate that I'm looking for and what I know from the notes. And in this, I'm trying to either confirm those or change it, and then based on their answers, try to form that story as well for me. So actually, those notes that I write on the insights and stuff, they start forming before the interview. They are formed during the interview, and it's after that I take some time. I typically make sure that I have about 15 to 20 minutes on that same day. So I never leave the notes till the next day, because since I'm not taking writing it down, I am sort of forced to write it down quickly so I don't forget. And yeah, I write it down in I block aside that time for writing it down. The other part is I've also got into a structure as well, that I like that. Okay, I want an overall idea. I want to know what I like, what I don't like, and the things that I'm unsure of. And for me, the other part is that documenting that is one of the ways in which I've actually learned, because later on in other interviews or other things, I hear another perspective on that uh, same insight on that might be wrong. So I try to share both the insight plus why I drew that conclusion. That is very, very invaluable at the later stage when you're actually making that decision as well. So yeah, those are some of the things that go into that note writing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've noticed about your team, the way you do hiring in your team is different people's notes complement each other, and you want to try really hard in general. All of us really try hard to not ask this exact same questions to the candidate, because then we're just wasting the candidate's time and we're not learning anything new as a company. How do you coordinate that within the team so that different parts of I guess the competencies that are required are being asked to the candidate? Do you assign that? How do you all coordinate that part of the work?
We discuss on it before the hiring. So typically we have a Slack channel that we create for each hiring. In that, we invite all the people who are participating in the hiring process. um, the JD that I talked about and the requirements and stuff, we posted there, and then we roughly agree that okay, first interview will cover these on these topics, and uh, that sort of is the thing. So it's not like we assign it directly. People volunteer as well that okay, these are the parts that I'm comfortable doing because of my background. This I can do, and so we also sort of have backups as well who cover that. That said, there are certain overlaps that happen, so that's why the notes are also important. So we try to force everyone to share their notes beforehand. The main reason for that is it helps us sync up and to ensure that the candidate does not have a bad experience, right? Because if the candidate, we don't want candidates to do much longer interviews than they absolutely have to, and in that 1 hour you want to make the best use of that time. So yeah, the note taking, and then that becomes a practice, right? So uh, I start a process, then the seniors in the team have learned the process, they teach the others. So each time, the other part is we constantly add people to our interviewing team, right? So the new interviewees have to interview with an experienced one for the first couple of interviews. Then basically the experienced one becomes an observer for a couple of interviews just to see if things are okay, and then we go ahead. So quite often we also just do pair interviews as well. So there are two interviews and a candidate where one of the interviewer may be running the thing, but that's also an important part of it because the interviewer themselves also may need feedback on that date,
Yeah.
and that helps us improve the process as we go along as well. So it, it's a
Yeah.
lot of learning there.
Viti, one of the things I was really curious about is, of course, you use Impress AI for all your hiring. How do you think the Impress AI report helps you prepare for your interviews or have more effective interviews?
Yeah, so it goes back to the idea of why the idea of Impress resonated with me so well back in the day when we started to launch it. So before Impress, I was working as a postdoc and I was hiring candidates both as software engineers as well as researchers. And one of the things that would often happen is candidates would say they have some technical skill, either C++ or some analytics background, but we would actually call them down for an interview, and it's while talking to them that we realize that the experience really isn't significant enough for us to work with them. So we have a 30-minute interview slot where within 5 minutes we know this is not going to work, but we still have to spend that 30 minutes or an hour on that interview because it would be rude to send the candidate back that fast. With Impress, one of the things that happens is that we get that background information on the candidate before it starts. So one of the harder parts in an interview is that you spend a lot of the time in the beginning trying to figure out what is the thread to pull on to see whether there is a sync up, whether there is a match uh, between the candidate and the company. With Impress, one of the things that happens is we are able to hit the ground running. As because of my notes, I can take a look at that and I know how I should structure that interview to make the most of it. And so we don't waste each other's time on that, and we get to very interesting conversations. So we know about the interesting projects, or uh, in the previous example I gave about the C++ one, there would be a candidate who said, "Yeah, I use C++ to make a robot in my undergrad." And that's like that's already the topic I want to talk about, right? I didn't have to go and ask about like what were the projects you did in this and all of that, and that particularly gives us a topic to start on, and that's the way in which it's helped the most. So in terms of like interviewing at Impress itself, as the one of the great things is that we I mean, not every candidate gets hired after the last process, but every candidate is generally a very good fit by the time I'm interviewing them. It's there's there's generally never the situation where I feel like 5 minutes into the interview that this is not going to work out at all. It's always uh, if nothing, we both go away with a very good conversation. We learn about each other and we know the reason why it may or may not work at that point. While previously there's both a chance that the interview is too short, or also that you spent actually an hour or so talking and it's in the 55th minute of the hour that you realize, oh, that's an interesting topic, but neither of us have time, and then you have to schedule another interview to get that. So neither of those actually happen in our interviews because of how much it helps us.
So, one of the related topics there is how have you worked on removing biases from the hiring process? I know we've done a great job on improving diversity in the company, but of course, we would have done something to remove the bias if we've achieved that. So, how's that worked out for you?
It's worked out really brilliantly for us, right? So one of the wonderful things is that we don't consider the resume directly. We don't consider the education, the universities and stuff. when the candidate is applying, and we don't even see their name until actually the interview stage. And the brilliant things is you get candidates who've either dropped out of college or who are reskilling after 10 years of experience in a completely different field. There's people who've come from teaching who are getting into product manager. The people who are coming as a mechanical engineer reskilling as a software engineer. These are all profiles that you would typically not consider, but there's not even that question mark of why are they here when the interview comes, because at that point they've proven their skills on the competencies. They've submitted answers to the questions that indicate why exactly they are fit for it. So it's it's sort of just built into the process that we don't look at the resume, we don't look at that information, we configure the competencies as that as much as possible the biasing information isn't there. We also try to make it such that even in our notes that we're there, even though we make sure we share the notes, we typically communicate in terms of the application ID rather than the name or email. So even that gives feeds in that. So when you're reading the notes, you read it purely as, again, you've not formed that information. So the other part where we also fight the bias is it goes back to that feedback system. So when people are sharing notes, one of the things that happens, especially with juniors, is they sometimes get a little brutal on their feedback because someone's not a great performer on the interview or something. They might give some feedback that's not really right, or feeds into some stereotype or bias that they internally have, right? But because of the note taking, because of that exercise, we get a chance to give that feedback, that, wait, this is not how we should say things because this happens, and then that never happens again. So that's the bias hiding part. Is a lot of it is built into the platform itself, but a lot of it is also the cultural awareness in the company that this is how we do things. We know that bias in hiring isn't a great thing, and we, over the years, we've been rewarded by that focus on unbiased hiring. So everyone in the team also cares about that. So when you give that feedback, yeah, this may not go down well, people immediately act on it, and that helps us ensure that our hiring is still as unbiased as it's been.
That's definitely an achievement. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Edie, is what have you learned from your experience in interviewing about things that work and don't work?
I think for me, the thing that doesn't work is trying to go to an interview and thinking I'll just wing it during that interview. Um, like not being prepared and going into that. It doesn't work on multiple levels. It On one level, I don't go away knowing much better about the candidate, so our decision ends up being flawed. The other part is the candidate actually goes away with a bad impression of the company as well, because uh, it's very obvious that I'm not prepared for that interview. So trying to wing it and trying to see that I'll go with my gut because I'm experienced, that doesn't work at all.
Edie, I wanted to ask you, what are some of your most memorable experiences while interviewing candidates?
So one of the things that's happened as we have interviewed in Impress is that there are a couple of interviewers that I do interviews with in pairs, and there are some of them that I'm really in sync with. That while we're doing the interview, we know what is the opinion that the other person is also forming. And so there was this one incident where we were interviewing a candidate who was somewhat junior, coming from a different industry into the role, and part of and we thought it was a mistake in our unbiased process that they actually got all the way to the stage where both of us were interviewing it. And about 15 to 20 minutes into the interview, I could sense that both of us had tried pulling at every thread we could to see if this could get interesting, and we had both given up, and we were wondering what to do with the rest of the interview. And so we went on to the typically the last part of the interview. So, do you have any questions for us? And then the candidate just blew our mind. Like, she asked like a lot of questions that were very perceptive about the company, told us about the way she thinks about things, and also told us about the way she had interpreted the questions we were asking earlier in that interview. So she wasn't just like going through the motion, she was actually listening. She had come back prepared, and the questions were so engaging that we actually overran our 1 hour slot for that interview because it got into conversations. There were questions there, and she was asking for things, and so that was a very interesting experience where the the interview actually changed things completely for us, even though both of us as experienced interviewers had sort of a different stance we were at in the beginning.
Really, so final question for you. Are there any tips you have from your years of experience in hiring that companies can use to make their own hiring more accurate?
I think the best thing you can do to improve your interview process and your hiring process is to put the effort into writing good job descriptions that make sense and writing out the competencies that work for you. It's a common practice to just take a JD out of the internet in some way and just plonk that into your hiring. But that effort that you put into making a good job description and thinking through that helps throughout the process. It helps get the candidate informed. It helps you and your internal interviewers to sync up on, oh yeah, this is what we're looking for, and your interviews, everything end up being much better because of that. So that simple prep work of writing a good JD and what you need in terms of competencies in the role, it pays a lot of dividends throughout the hiring process.
I completely agree with that. I think our experience has shown that very, very clearly, both with clients and internally. Thank you so much, Veeti, for your time today. I learned a lot about things that even as your co-founder, I didn't know about your processes. So, looking forward to catching up more on those some of those areas.
Thank you, sir.